Good morning. Thank you for being with us this morning. My name is Patricia, and I'm here with my colleagues.
Sam?
Sarah.
Brian. Becky.
And we're here today to present to you our Medicaid business process improvement plan. So we've met with the DVS, we've met with the DOC, we've met with the DCH, and we've crunched some numbers. And we believe that our best strategy going forward is the Department of Veterans Services Outreach Program.
We first mentioned to some facts and numbers in the plan. We have some assumptions. We know that 2.5 millions, there are 2.4 million Medicaid recipients in the state, and 7% of them are the veterans, which is equal to 168,000 people. And also we know that nationally 40% of the veterans are eligible for the VA benefits. And if we approximate this percent to the state, we have 67,200 eligible ones in the state. If we calculate the average cost in the sample population, we have $1,230 per veterans and per the year. And then if we multiply this cost to the number of eligible ones, we get around $82 million as the total expenses for the eligible veterans with Medicaid. And also we know that just one of 4 eligible veterans already applied for the VA benefits, and at the maximum we could push 75% of the eligible ones to the VA benefits as well. And so the potential cost savings will be around $61 million. And also we know that this cost will increase in following years because the coverage of the Medicaid cost will grow by the state federal in the future. And at the last, if we divide this number to the total cost of Medicaid, for the veterans, we get 31% savings of the total Medicaid veterans expenses.
My colleague just gave you some of the numbers, but let's keep in mind what the overall goal here is. An increase in Medicaid enrollment for the sake of that? No. The goal here is to get the most amount of people with the quality health care that they deserve, and that's what matters. Keeping that in mind, there will be less veterans on Medicaid. Based on those numbers, we're going to have a potential of 67,000 less just off the bat that will be pushed to the VA system. But less vets on Medicaid means that more non-veterans can be served by the Medicaid system within the state and served better due to the cost savings of close to $62 million. The capacity of Medicaid to reach more people will increase, and the overall amount of people covered by both healthcare systems will allow the maximum access to healthcare for all. Better benefits for vets. So what about the vets? On average, the VA healthcare system is a better coverage than the Medicaid system. Arguably speaking, it's also a higher quality of care. This proposal allows the state to be better stewards of the taxpayer dime and at the same time helping veterans and allowing more people to be served overall by the Medicaid system within the state. We all watch the news and we're aware that the United States Department of Defense is going through a significant downsizing effort. What does this mean long term? The amount of service members that will be transitioning to the civilian life will be in the tens of thousands in the coming years. Many of these veterans will fall below the income threshold and will normally qualify for Medicaid. Implementing these changes now will allow these veterans to be streamlined right to the VA system and not ever get involved through the state to begin with. DCH is already overburdened as it is. This will alleviate the influx of the new veterans that DCH won't have to deal with because they're going to go right into the VA system. This will help them out in terms of their personnel constraints as well as their budgetary constraints. Getting ahead of that problem will save the state millions and millions of dollars in the long run. In Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address, he said, "To care for him who shall have borne the battle for his widow and orphan." Why is that relevant to today? It's very popular. People love vets. They love taking care of vets. This proposal will be very politically acceptable by the public. At the same time, people love when the state saves money. This proposal helps veterans get them higher access to quality of care, at the same time being better stewards of taxpayers' dime. It's a win-win, and increasing Medicaid's capacity while at the same time helping veterans will be widely popular. Compared to having inmates in the Department of Corrections being put on Medicaid. The comparison is while the taxpayer may not actually be paying a penny more, the perception that their hard-earned tax dollars is going to pay for inmates for criminals to be under Medicaid is a tough pill to swallow. It's much more acceptable to know that that money is being reallocated towards helping veterans while their neighbor can now have extended care as a civilian.
Now you're probably wondering how we're going to accomplish this. So the first step would be to implement the highly successful Washington State-style Paris system. This system has helped save Washington $30 million by connecting 3,300 veterans and their families to improve VA benefits. Also, in a smaller pilot program in California, it saved the state $1.6 million by just taking 24 veterans off of Medicaid assistance for a year. This system is already mandated since 2010, and its functionality is to be used to locate these veterans that are eligible for services and then proceed to let them know that they're eligible. To accomplish that, we would hire an outreach coordinator, which would be pulled from the 2 part-time staffers that the Department of Veterans Services offered up for this endeavor. These 2 staffers would be responsible for locating veterans in the system who are on Medicaid and eligible for VA benefits and notifying them, and then helping them to register with the VA so they could receive improved benefits. This will reduce the burden on DCH by removing ideally 67,200 veterans from the Medicaid system, and will help them be able to serve other people better. Obviously, interagency cooperation will be incredibly important to this endeavor. We recommend creating a joint task force between the Department of Community Health, the Department of Veterans Services, and the Federal Veterans Affairs. This task force will help ensure a smooth transition and make sure that these 3 agencies are on the same page. There would also be a memo of understanding sent out between the agencies to accomplish the same thing, make sure that everybody's on the same page and knows what is going on. Hopefully this will prevent a bottleneck at the state-federal divide and allow veterans to get the services they deserve as quickly as possible.
So we've crunched the numbers, we've given you the advantages, and we've talked about how we're going to implement this strategy. Like any new project, we need to consider the risks and constraints of moving this project forward. Perhaps our biggest risk is that people will remain on Medicaid while simultaneously enrolling in VA, since they're eligible to do so. We're hoping to mitigate this risk through the outreach effort from the Department of Veterans Services. We're also assuming that veteran care is significantly better at the VA, therefore people will shift towards VA care if they're eligible to do so. Like any healthcare system, these processes are confusing. With the help of Paris, we're hoping to implement an agency that can implement a person that can find who these veterans are through the use of Paris and streamline them before they even come into the Medicaid system. We understand that after meeting with the Department of Veterans Services, they are currently not using Paris. These are some upfront costs that might be higher as we implement a new software program. Since we're operating on a tight deadline of December 31st, 2015, we think it's beneficial to bring most of those costs upfront with the implementation of Paris. We also understand that we're potentially losing funding through the enhanced Medicaid funding for eligibility and enrollment activities advanced planning document. We're willing to forego these fundings for potential future long-term benefits. Finally, we're not the VA. We don't know what they're planning. We're not sure in which direction they could be taking their veterans' care. However, after speaking with the department and speaking with veterans, the trend in the last couple of years has been to access more care rather than less. So we're hoping, based on these changes, and also with our MOU, we're hoping that we can mitigate sort of the unknown variable in this equation.
So in summary, our plan meets all of the goals of the Health Improvement Initiative, which is streamlining the business process, increasing coordination between agencies, improving customer service, and potential cost savings. This is based on some assumptions that we are making, one of which is that the 40% of the veterans who are currently receiving Medicaid will be eligible for coverage through the VA. And that's based on a national data for national population that we're just applying to the Medicaid population. Also, we are assuming that veterans will receive superior care when they then enroll in benefits through the VA, and they'll thus drop Medicaid. And so that way, we're reducing the cost to the state. So we are implementing Paris to streamline the business process and coordinate through DVS, DCH, and the VA. We're improving customer service by reducing the amount of burden on DCH, and not just for veterans, but for everyone. And then we're also producing a cost savings of $61 million or more. This benefits the state, benefits the veterans, it benefits the taxpayers and all the agencies involved. It is a win-win situation. Thank you.
I have a question. So I know you talked to the Department of Veteran Services. How much of this is really the state's responsibility around getting veterans connected to the VA versus a wider national issue for DOD and the VA nationally to be, was there consideration of what are there larger sort of national efforts being done to more streamline, veterans as they leave active duty?
There is a national effort being done, and any plan, and this proposal will have DVS have their plan of outreach to veterans in their state nested within a larger federal VA campaign to have access to federal care. And while it's not maybe necessarily their responsibility, there's still a state agency responsible to protect those state dollars. So giving veterans, if their loyalty is to the veterans, and giving those veterans now in the VA federal system, it's a dual role. They're accomplishing their mission to the veterans, and at the same time protecting the state's dollars and allowing more non-veterans to have better opportunities within the Medicare system, Medicaid system.
Okay. So I'm curious about how confident you all are in our ability to actually capture a large share of this population. I think I'm in full agreement with the soundness of your analysis in estimating, the potential eligible population size. But especially when you look at the examples of other states that have tried this, in particular California, which you cited, they had outreach, they had coordination plans, and they only succeeded in actually moving 24 veterans initially. So while I appreciate your cost projections, I'm just wondering of that potential, I think you said it was almost $62 million, how much could we actually truly expect to save in the first year, the second year, the third year? Did you do, an analysis around that? Because I'm just very worried that at the end of the day, if someone asks us to report, should we implement this, how successful we were, we're going to say we potentially impacted a few dozen people, as opposed to, the potential population, I think, in the prisons, which is much more identifiable, and we have a lot more control over actually enrolling them.
So I think Brian is going to answer. I'm just going to touch on the point of actually identifying the people that are in the prison system. After meeting with our colleagues at the Department of Correction, they informed us that they're actually only enrolling in sort of a temporary Medicaid while they are in prison. which doesn't necessarily translate into them guaranteeing them Medicaid once they're out of the system. So while it is, your numbers are more concrete sort of on the front end, those numbers don't necessarily translate into the same pool of people receiving Medicaid and applying for it, because they would need to go through another application process, is my understanding.
Right.
So I think that was our biggest turning point, is that that project is not a long term. It's very short term. It's very while they're in the hospital, and so those numbers don't. When comparing the two strictly in terms of that, they're not necessarily.
But for the purposes of hospitalization services, those would be real numbers actually impacted and real costs actually saved on a per hospitalization basis.
Correct. But if we're thinking a long-term strategy of people actually getting into the system and getting care, then we want to look at the long-term picture. And so getting a 24-hour or 48-hour, I think we crunched the number of the average stay, and it was well under a week. That's great, but those people are not necessarily guaranteed access after their stay.
And as for the California example, that case study was done in a very small, I think it was 4 or 5 counties. And even still with that those 24 people, it was, I think, a significant amount of money saved on the part of the state. So if we expand this to the entirety of our state, and we have a successful outreach program, there's no reason.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Just in the interest of time though. So then what does the differentiator look like for us, right? What tactically should we and could we be doing from an outreach and coordination perspective to ensure that we are more successful than California? I guess that's the nature of my question.
Tying it back into the response for the first question that I addressed, there's already national campaigns going on. Most of the VA and also the DoD now is isolating, transitioning service members to veteran life. So before they finish their transition, they're being linked to the resources to allow them to enroll right away. We're going to be nested within those existing federal policies. So the state DVS we're going to recommend that they kind of piggyback off of these successes and capitalize as much as they can on the federal initiatives that are already in place. We're pretty confident that they're going to be able to they're going to reach these guys in person while they're still in the service, through emails. Our DVS is prepared to have at least one representative that's strictly in charge of having face-to-face interactions with these veterans, helping them get enrolled, helping them fill out the paperwork. We're confident that the outreach will be successful, and the vast majority of that $62 million in cost savings will be achievable.
Let me ask you this follow-up question. Given the national campaign and given the level of confidence you seem to have in the ability for the work that's already being planned and done to kind of naturally incentivize the DVS here to move in that direction, why should we put additional grant money at this time into that, as opposed to, it sounds like you're saying DVS here is already incentivized to implement what you're suggesting. So wouldn't we be better served by incentivizing our colleagues at the Department of Commerce to take action?
I think that by using Paris to identify an overlap of data, because we're not just using it to look within the VA system, we're looking at who's already enrolled in Medicaid and then transferring them over. So by having an MOU and a shared system, we're coordinating to streamline to access those people, and that's why we'll be more successful than California, because we won't have that overlap. We'll share that data and it'll be in the Paris system. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, although it didn't answer my question.
I think the long-term concerns, and I agree, well, we're pretty confident that we're realistic as well. We don't think that entire $62 million in cost savings is going to be realized, but the vast majority will be, but not in that first year. So we're looking long-term. We're thinking about the downsizing of the military. We're thinking about the amount of veterans that are becoming into the state from active duty life. Okay, this type of system will target those guys. That's why we say ahead of the curve, ahead of the ball. The foreshadowing of that influx of new veterans to be targeted, and that's how we're going to get to that 62 million.
Okay. Any other questions? guys. Thank you.